My name's Marie Lovrod. I'm the coordinator of Women's and Gender Studies, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Indigenous Communities panel. The presenters are seated in the order that they will present. So immediately to my left, your right, is Deborah Lee, Cree, Mohawk, and Métis librarian who worked at the National Library of Canada and the Archives of Canada for 7 years and has been an academic librarian here at the University of Saskatchewan for 9 years. Her research includes promoting relevant library services for Indigenous peoples and providing digital means of cultural knowledge transfer with respect to Indigenous protocols. She's presented locally, nationally, and internationally, published in many peer-reviewed venues. Her most recent publication is Co-edited. It's Aboriginal and Visible Minority Librarians' Oral Histories from Canada. Beside Deborah is Tasha Hubbard, who's an assistant professor of English at the University of Saskatchewan and an award-winning documentary filmmaker. Her latest film in post-production is about a 60s Scoop family reunited for the first time 50 years after they were taken from their mother. Her research is on Indigenous film, Indigenous creative representation of the buffalo, and Indigenous women's and children's histories. Next to Tasha is Carol Greyeyes. She's an actor, writer, educator, and member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. She's former artistic director of the Centre for Indigenous Theatre and founding principal of the Indigenous Theatre School in Toronto and Canada. She has a BFA and BEd from the University of Saskatchewan and an MFA from York University and has directed and taught in theatres all over Canada and North America and has acted in film, television, and radio. She's assistant professor in the Department of Drama and coordinator of the new Certificate of Proficiency in Aboriginal Theatre and continues to maintain her professional acting career. Finally, we have Dorothy Mayo, who's a fluent speaker of both Cree and English languages and a member of the Saulteaux First Nation in Treaty 6 territory of Saskatchewan. Her expertise is developed through combined First Nations traditional and academic learning. President of the Saskatchewan Indian Cultural Centre located on the English River First Nation, she leads a team dedicated to the preservation, protection, and promotion of First Nations languages and cultures. With her background in social work, she's led developments at the provincial level toward employment equity in Indian arts and crafts, and she was one of the management team who brought Wîcêhtowin Heritage Park into reality. She's also earned her Master in Public Administration from the University of Regina and has invested her entire career in First Nations institutional development. So please welcome our illustrious panel.
Good morning, everyone. I guess I'm the lucky one that gets to go first on this panel. For those who are newly arrived, I just want to welcome everyone to the territory once again, the homeland of the Métis and the Treaty 6 territory. Okay, I want to briefly speak about opportunities for cultural preservation provided by libraries and archives for Indigenous communities. Now that's funny because I'm not used to speaking briefly. So when Isabel said 5 minutes, my jaw dropped, right? So I'm gonna try to keep to that as well as I can. When we talk about cultural preservation, at the U of S, our flagship, at the library, our flagship Aboriginal initiative is the Indigenous Studies portal. So you'll see a little replica of the turtle that organizes the information in a culturally relevant way. So that's just one aspect that we're working on to make library services more culturally relevant. And in case you don't know about the iPortal, it's a virtual library that is a favorite at universities across Canada and around the world. So it's also obvious that libraries help preserve cultural works by acquiring written publications, including fiction, creative, nonfiction, and nonfiction. So what I have here is representations of books that have been about or Saskatchewan or that are by Saskatchewan authors. And there are other formats such as films, maps, and newspapers, also representing some Saskatchewan works, including Tasha's first film, Two Worlds Colliding. I had to put that image up there. Yeah. So these are all collected for our many collections across the library system and for the use and enjoyment of our library users. But in addition to that, in our province, libraries promote the gift of storytelling during the annual Saskatchewan Aboriginal Storytelling Month activities through the support of the Library Services for Saskatchewan Aboriginal Peoples Committee. These events also serve as links between the oral and written traditions. At the U of S, I have hosted 8 such events. 5 of them are represented here, including actors, writers, musicians, and a film screening and talk. Not so obvious is the opportunity that libraries have for digitizing cultural heritage products, while at the same time respecting copyright concerns. The U of S has done some good work in this regard by digitizing Indigenous archival materials in various cultural institutions and archives across central and northern Saskatchewan. These items are hosted on the Our Legacy website and linked to from the Indigenous Studies portal. Digitizing archival materials is often less problematic in terms of adhering to copyright rules as opposed to digitizing published works, such as complete books, which Google has gotten in trouble with, as you may recall. Further, the Our Legacy project came about as a result of successful grant applications to the National Archival Digitization Program, which has since been discontinued under the Harper government. For another project, artifacts collected by the Departments of Anthropology and Archaeology were also photographed and hosted on the Aboriginal Research Resources website in 2012. The value of this project was making accessible collections that had previously only been available for viewing in person and by appointment. This project, which hired Aboriginal U of S students, was funded by one-time library funds to commemorate the TRC national event in Saskatoon in 2012. However, digitization at the U of S could be improved by engaging Indigenous communities in the digitization process by having community members determine the content and how it is accessed. For instance, the Indigenous Knowledge Centres in Australia have set up profiles of community members in order to access digitized cultural products or objects on networked computer workstations. Their access is based on community members' genders, ages, and roles in their communities. In this way, they honor their protocols as to who has access to what information. These materials are not available external to their own communities. Australia was also at the cutting edge when they developed the Mukutu project, which made free software and training available to Indigenous communities to create their own digitization projects. This idea was taken up by several Indigenous groups across the U.S., including the Plateau Peoples web portal, which had full-blown support by several tribes in the Washington state area. Further, academic libraries in particular could extend their digitization expertise to Indigenous communities to digitize their own cultural heritage in a way that respects their cultural protocols. This would mean making them available to their community as they see fit. UBC is the first university in Canada to undertake this kind of community engagement through their successful indigitization.ca project. It takes capacity to do this. There are 3 librarians working in their specialized Wewa library, plus a digitization team that works out of their Museum of Anthropology, including Indigenous people working in this field, as well as faculty in the iSchool at UBC. Lessons to be learned. Grants for digitization projects need to be reinstated. And 2, while a successful indigitization.ca project is benefiting Indigenous communities in the province of BC, and I should say over last summer they had 10 projects going across the province, for that summer alone, and the project actually started in 2013. I just will wrap up here. Other provinces and their universities need to find ways to build capacity within institutions, hire Indigenous peoples with technical skills and expertise, and collaborate with Indigenous communities to help them with technical training and other support to realize community-driven digitization projects. That's it.
Okay. I just gave another 5-minute talk in Calgary at an international television conference, and I went over time. So I'm going to time myself so I don't do that this time either. So I want to start out by apologizing in that I have to leave this conversation after this panel, and I wish I could stay for the day because I think the conversations that we're having in this room are important and hopefully will reverberate into the future. And I especially appreciated the idea of renewal of policy that's been brought up, considering arts in Saskatchewan, and also the idea that it's not always about industry and business, but that it's about righting historical wrongs and the moral obligation that we have in this area and other territories in Canada. And also just, arts for art's sake, and how that relates to art as cultural survival and well-being in Indigenous communities. And so I have some thoughts as well, and part of it is through my own particular practice of being an Indigenous artist, an Indigenous filmmaker, and coming into an institution such as the Academy, and doing so in ways that continue to make space for Indigenous arts here on campus, and I'm following in the footsteps of others who have been doing this, but thinking about really tangible ways that education institutions can be more welcoming to academics who are also creators, to staff who bring those skills as well, and also at the end of the day, providing the support for arts initiatives and Indigenous arts initiatives on campus. And so a group of us have done that on somewhat of an ad hoc basis in the sense of bringing Indigenous artists here and creating space to have academic conversations and to spur thought and response to issues that are happening in Indigenous communities and how art can be used to bring that to the forefront. And so an example being a group of us brought the Red Dress installation project to campus, and we installed 130 red dresses hanging in different buildings outside. We created interpretive to bring attention to missing and murdered women, to encourage this to become a campus conversation, to encourage the things that we're talking about in Indigenous communities, that it's not an Indigenous issue per se, it's all of our issue, and so working to invite people into that conversation. I also want to just bring some tangible things here in that, to bring arts into institutions also means having the technical support available. And so one of the things, one of my little bright lights out of the darkness that was the decimation of the film industry in this province was that some of the film people found space here on campus. And so we actually here, as a resource at the University of Saskatchewan, have practicing producers, cinematographers, sound recordists, here through EMAP that I think gets overlooked sometimes. And I just want to stress that, to support the arts, those very sort of hard, tech support, et cetera, create that atmosphere. I also wanted to talk about just the need to really solidify support for Indigenous arts organizations. So much energy and time goes into, and I think this is across the board for arts, but I think, because Indigenous arts organizations tend to get pulled in lots of different directions, having that consistent support throughout the years is important so that they can spend their time visioning and growing and outreach to other communities as opposed to always worried about that next year's funding. I also wanted to talk, and I think this happens here on campus sometimes, and I know it's an issue that some of us are starting to look at, but that we tend to overlook the North when we start talking about arts in the province and the inclusion of, I know I'm thinking specifically northern communities, but also rural Indigenous communities. We have a pretty healthy Indigenous arts community here in the city, and I know Regina is the same, but we need to also not overlook, and that takes a specific kind of support and initiative to bring that. I also want to talk about the fact that Indigenous peoples and artists are great collaborators, and I think in the coffee break even, I had a conversation with someone about, well, let's work on something together and collaborate. And I think it's important, again, to have, if we're thinking about a renewal of arts policy, to have a specific resource that is meant for that, for people to come together, whether it's a one-time initiative, whether it's ongoing arts partnerships. And we have models for that, very successful models of partnerships between, for example, PAVED and CNYC and others that are doing that. And so it'd be good to see that on a bigger scale. Oh, and my screen blanked out on me. Oh, I'm 26 seconds over. My last thing that I want to say is that as part of that renewal, I also think it's integral that institutions such as the universities, that museums, that galleries, all of our organizations talk about wanting to be inclusive of Indigenous people, and that's great to hear. I think sometimes what gets overlooked in these conversations is that people have a legacy of prejudice when it comes to working with different communities, working with Indigenous people specifically because of our very fraught history here in Saskatchewan. And I think that senior administrators and arts leaders need to start thinking about how they're going to address that within their organizations. I'd love to say at government as well. How are we dealing? What kind of relationship are we forming with people? And is that relationship based on respect? And I think in many cases it's not. And so I'd really like to put that out there, that needs to be part of the conversation if we're going to talk about renewal. And I have lots to say about the film industry, but I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Can you give me 1 minute? Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello. There we go. I left my notes at my seat, and I thought, this is a sign I am to speak from the heart. So I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth, but this really is like seeing all my friends and family again. Tasha and I had a bit of a laugh when they talked about us being Indigenous community. Like, we are speaking about the Indigenous community. It's like, ooh, and what community is that? There is such diversity in this room, and my experience, I was out east for a while, where there are many, even the Indigenous community is multinational. It's international. So when we talk about community, what community are we talking about? And I feel that in Saskatchewan, because of its history, we do have a history of collaborating and cooperating, actually. The newcomers to this area would not have made it this far if it wasn't for the First Peoples who said, treat yourselves with this bark, you know, don't eat those. This is what you can use to make your home warm and safe and dry. And it's continued. It's not for naught, because we are talking about politics, that this is the home of CCF, NDP, you know, that vision of people cooperating and working together. Interestingly enough, out east has also a very noble history of cooperatives, of people coming together and supporting each other. And quite frankly, I think that's the only way that we move forward, is to connect. And I used to be a sovereignist in that I felt that we had to have our own stuff. We had to have our own policy, our own rules, our own, and we had to adhere to that. And as an artist, that's kind of an anathema. That's the contrary. That's putting form over content. And really, the content is the spirit. That's the life force that we're trying to connect to in any situation. And because our forms become, you know, they become papers, they become studies, they become rules and protocol, and the content actually gets buried. And if we're talking about culture, it has to be dynamic. It has to move forward. It has to be connected to that life force. And our new program, wîcêhtowin, the Aboriginal Theatre program, when we were developing it, the idea was to keep it as open to possibility as possible. You talked about institutions, and institutions are notorious for adding layer upon layer of form, which is really kind of meaningless. And I don't think people do it intentionally. You know, Indigenous artists are not excluded. Diverse artists are not excluded. Immigrants are not excluded because we don't like them, or we are actively resisting them. It's because we fear change. And that is a human condition. It's not, you know, no particular culture has ownership on fear. And fear of change is also an anathema to art, because you're always pushing the envelope. You're always trying to go to that place where it's unknown. And so I think that's why there's always this kind of tension, and it's one step forward sometimes and two steps back. But I'm here to say that change is happening, whether we like it or not. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, you talked about the great man. And I just want to say that I'm so grateful for the champions, the people who have, and many of them are in this room, who have made it their life work to stay committed and to follow their beliefs and to keep fighting, keep pushing that rock up the hill, because we all benefit. We all get tired, and we all want to just give up and say, I can't do this anymore. But then someone else says, okay, I'll do it. You know, like there are people in this room who've been at this for decades, and you think, oh my God, it's same old, same old. But just the fact that we can have this program, this Indigenous theater program, is a miracle. But it's building on things that were started a long time ago. I never thought it would happen. I honestly never thought it would happen. But people just kept insisting and insisting and insisting, and it kept coming around, and eventually the time was right. And now we have this program. And I don't know where it's going to go. I'm really trying not to be prescriptive because that's that form that I'm talking about. And I'm just overjoyed that it's happened. And at an institution of all places. But I think back to the cultural college that used to be here on this campus. Serene Stump, Eddie Poitras. You would walk into that space and the energy, you could just feel this energy. And I think that is, that's part of the layer upon layer upon layer until eventually there is enough momentum that change and transformation happens. So I am very grateful to not only you, but the people who are behind you, who have just, stayed the course and hung in there. So thank you very much.
Am I alive? Kahkiuktatam skatnawau, uutta humaga pikswean. Egwa mina humagata sihtameg. Kahkiume gumanina ne petu skattamak. Tansikai sihatameg, culture. I just want to greet everyone and to say how happy I am to be here this morning with you to talk about culture and policy and governance. And they are all words, but they're also very different concepts in the work that we do at the Saskatchewan Indian Cultural Center. And just to give you a bit of a background of who I work for, it's a center that's been there for over 43 years. It was one of the first institutions that was set up by the elders and the leaders of the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. And it was here on campus at St. Chad's over here, and that was where I think started my path in this world here to learn more about academics, to learn about book learning, and because that was where I entered the Indian social work program. And I can say that without that program, I and many other First Nation students wouldn't have those designations of those degrees that are behind our names. And it was, but let me tell you why it was set up, why this institution was established. It was because of what happened in the Indian residential schools, what was going on there. Children were coming home to their communities, not knowing their language, not knowing their culture, being disconnected from their communities. And with, of course, the wisdom of our elders, they wanted to change this. And that's why they set up the Indian Cultural College at the time. And it did everything. It did both vocational, technical, academic training. But as time grew, separate institutions were set up, like the First Nations University of Canada and SIIT, to do to do specific training in those areas. Culture is a way of life. That's how we look at it in terms of as Saulteaux people, as Cree people, Dene people. It's different because when you think about it as a way of life, it is all of you. It is part of your identity, your connection to the land, so that language becomes really important. I look at it as an Anishinaabe, and that's in the Saulteaux language or the Ojibwe language. And I don't think it's really a surprise to see that our panel is all women, because women are the knowledge keepers, many in our communities. And they hold that role, and they bring forward to their children and grandchildren. So we have a different approach to that. And they are part of the laws that we follow when we share this knowledge, when we have a transfer of knowledge. We have to follow protocols that are associated with that. We have to follow those practices. So when we share that, it's done in very specific ways, as well as very specific practices and responsibilities. When you access that knowledge, you agree to be part of that, to follow those laws that are associated with the knowledge that you're seeking. So when I talk about Iniumamtoneitsigan, that's Indigenous way of thinking. Inu is the people. Mamtoneitsigan is this. We have been colonized, and our thinking is colonized. And we have to break away from that. We have to re-educate ourselves. And that's what the various institutions are there for, to help us that way, to help our children, to be able to think differently about our world. Because when I went into the Indian social work program, the director was Myrna Uzichipi. And I still remember going into that interview to be part of that program. But that's what they talked about, is Iniumamtoneitsigan. They talked to us about living in two worlds. In our world as Indigenous people, as well as in the non-Indigenous world. Very different. And we had to know the difference. And we had to be able to walk in those two worlds seamlessly. Some of us are more successful than others in doing that. But nonetheless, we are connected to our culture. We're connected to that land, because that land informs our language. It tells us many things. And that's part of the connection we have to the Creator. We are children of the Creator. And in that way, we have to fulfill our mission as human beings walking on this earth. The work we do at the Cultural Center is one of promotion, protection, and preservation. Big words. But we do it and have been doing it for over 43 years. Our people, as we're told by the elders, have been put on this land that we call Turtle Island. And with that, we didn't come from anywhere else. We were put here. And with that, when I talk about Iniumamtoneitsigan, we were given our minds as whether we are Dene people Cree people, Dakota people, Nakota, Lakota. We were given a mind to use to make sure that we protect that information and that we pass it on in a good way to our children. We have operated almost, I will say, in isolation, fighting for the things that belong to us, our language and our culture. We have fought hard for it. And the reason why I use that word, fighting for our language and our culture, because the external influences are so huge that it's almost overwhelming. But we were set up to do that. And our elders have told us never give up. And so we persevere. Now, in thinking about some of the research, the work, the academic work that's been done in the last, let's say, 15 years with RCAP and the apology in 2008, and now the TRC 94 call to action recommendations. A lot of work has been done, a lot of good work, and we still refer to the RCAP. Nothing really has changed for us as a cultural center, even with all of that good work. We talk about and I mean these institutions, making space for us. I think that's important, making space for us. We, I think, would be willing to be in that space, but we don't want to fit into a box as well. We're self-determining, and we own our language and our culture. Many institutions across the country are creating all kinds of programs on their own, accessing funding and resources to do that. And our involvement is fairly minimal in those initiatives. I think that has to change. That's important. Think outside the box in terms of how we can be involved, how we can contribute to these institutions. Because when we create our institutions, it is about the people. We don't think of the institutions in themselves, but it's created for the people. That's who informs us. Creating cultural space for us would be one really important step in this institution, but that it be directed by Indigenous people. I want to also say that the many people that do work in these institutions are people, very brave people. And I want to congratulate their perseverance in continuing that fight for us within those institutions. In their way, being present, being visible, that's important too. And that's the work that I want to just say a big thank you to them, because there are many out there. And I think that's our voices are being heard out there. So in terms of me being asked to come here, I represent the institution. Yes, indeed. I do represent the First Nations community, 74 First Nations in this province that cover 5 treaty areas. We are a huge community. We make up 20% of this province. And that's not to even mention the Métis and non-status, as they referred to them before the Supreme Court decision. So we're huge. So we are a big community, and we need to be involved, but how we're involved is really important to us too. 2016, we're still talking about this. It should have happened long ago. Great recommendations in RCAP in 1985. We still haven't acted on that. That's kind of sad. But these discussions that we're having and you're having today are important to inform us in ways that we can make a change. But that change isn't going to be an easy one for you, because you may not like what we have to say. You may not like the way we want it done, but you have to hear us. Thank you.
I've been very moved by all that you've said, and I have to say that as a settler-descended academic in this institution, one of the things I look for are how this institution will change, and I think that all of you have given really excellent suggestions for that. But if there was one thing that you could ask of the University of Saskatchewan, and you've asked several things, so you might just want to reiterate, but is there anything you want to say as a last word in terms of that transformation that needs to happen in our collaborations across institutions?
Support wîcêhtowin. Give us money so we can run our program. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Yes, the institution said we could have this program, but they are not supporting us financially. So, we want to be able to hire, language experts, cultural experts, knowledge keepers that we feel will enrich our program, and we have to pay them.
Well, I guess mine comes from something Dorothy said, that we have our ways of doing things and that it doesn't always align with the bureaucracies of institutions, and that those systems can be really counterproductive in terms of involvement with community. It seems silly to me that, how difficult it is to get an honorarium to bring a knowledge keeper here on campus, and that there is no dedicated funding, or if it is, it's not across the board. Certain places have it and certain don't, which makes things challenging. So it's really about that we can follow our own ways of doing things, our own protocols. It's a challenge to do that, and I'm not pointing fingers directly at the U of S, because I think it's across the board in institutions. Yeah.
I just wanted to respond a little bit to this question in terms of all the talk that's going on about indigenizing the academy, and that's going on at campuses all across the country. And I really don't feel that it's sincere, and I don't feel that they're doing it for the right reasons. And if they wanted to do it for the right reasons, we'd have a lot more say in what goes on. That's it.
I agree with all the things that my co-panelists have said, because why would we want to trust you? Why? With the experience, with your track record, why would we want to do that? Why would we give our language and our culture over to you to look after for us? That's the only thing that we have that is part of our identity. And it just is inconceivable to me that you would ask us for that. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. We have one more question.
My name is Biula Gana, and I work with the Saskatchewan Association of Immigrant Settlement and Integration Agencies. We support the immigrant settlement agencies in various ways. And one of the projects that we've been trying to do, which we are working in partnership with the Aboriginal Friendship Centers and the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan, is to build relationship, to foster relationship with newcomers and First Nation or Aboriginal people. As Indigenous, I sometimes mix it up. So what that we've been trying to do, and last year we organized consultation across the province, and Brad is here, who had been part of that. We went round and had a discussion with First Nations, Indigenous people, and all the different groups and newcomers. What we found was that most often the newcomers are more making more effort to engage with the people of the first people of the land. But the other way around is a little bit not forthcoming. And I would just like to seek your opinion on how, or your thoughts on what could we do and how could we foster some of those, or what do you think could be the obstacles?
Thank you for your question. Very good question. I guess also before I answer your question, I should say something else as well. We need your support. Having said all what I said, I do need your support. We need your support. So it's not that we're not asking for it, but we do need it. One of the things that there was a survey done, I think about 4 years ago, on the knowledge of First Nations people across the country, and one of the things that it told us was that the newcomers, the recent immigrants, weren't as sympathetic of Indigenous issues or even knowledgeable about the issues that faced First Nations people here in Canada. That's alarming. And I will say, across the country, the awareness of our issues is probably what is learned through the media. Always never positive if you rely on that information to know or even understand us as First Nations people. So I just wanted to say that before I answer your question. One of the things that is really important, I think, for us in our Indigenous communities is that relationships. You have to establish relationships with us. And it's not visiting us once It's not twice or even 3 times, because we won't learn about who you are in that time frame several times, many times. And that you have to tell us how genuine you are about that relationship. We have to trust you. So in a relationship, you have to work at it. So if you want to work with us, you have to come and see us, talk to us, have tea or coffee with us without asking for something in the beginning. Maybe we'll consider your request after a bit, but that's one of the first things I would say, as if you're asking for my advice, is establish a relationship with us. Then maybe we'll have a good dialogue after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.